Have you ever heard the phrase, speak now or forever hold your peace? Yeah, it's a classic line used in weddings, and people think it's gone back for a couple thousand years, but actually it was just instituted in the 1500s. It was instituted in England by the Church of England because, the communication was a little rough back then. And so for weeks leading up to a wedding, they would announce in Sunday morning services like this one, the couples that were about to be married. And so we have a couple in our church getting married next month, Caitlin and Micah. And so over the next few weeks, I would be saying, hey, just so you know, Caitlin and Micah are getting married, and people in the community or that village would understand, okay, this is what's happening. And so people would show up the day of, and they had the right to speak up or to forever hold their peace. And it wasn't what you see in the movies. It wasn't, I'm really in love with him. No, I'm really in love with her. No, it wasn't that. It was more of a legal opportunity. It was if something was happening, maybe this person was married to somebody else and nobody knew. Is there a legal reason why these two should not be married? You must speak up now. It is your responsibility. In this day and age, when I do weddings, I don't even ask that question, because if we're asking that question on the day of, we're asking the wrong question. But we find in this first sign that Jesus does, we're seeing Mary, the mother of Jesus, speaking up. She's using her voice. Instead of me just telling you what she says, we're gonna read it together. We're gonna go to John chapter 2, verse 1 through 11, and if you're following on the book that we gave out last week, maybe you have that today, maybe it's the only Bible you have, it's totally fine. You're gonna go to page 68, okay? So page 68, John chapter 2, starting in verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. So Cana is a city, Galilee is a region. And Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. And his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet, the master of ceremonies, the person in charge of the wedding. And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine, and he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. They don't know any better. But you have saved the best until now. Verse 11, and what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs. Remember, John uses the word signs instead of just miracles, signs, because they point to something. The signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is really important for us to understand. So as we dive into each one, we're gonna dive in, and for some of you who maybe are new to faith and exploring, this might seem like a lot of information. It's okay. You go to our website, Digging Deeper, it's at the very bottom of the homepage, and all of this is there, all the notes, and there'll be some questions for you to dive into a little bit further with some of the verses. So you can always go there, and you can always go back online and watch, but we wanna do a deep dive here, and part of that deep dive is John, the writer of John, who most believe is John. The writer of John always points to Jesus being at the beginning because of his divinity, that he is fully man and fully God, and at the beginning means he is the Alpha. He's also the end, which is called the Omega. So if he's at the beginning, he's in the beginning, that means he understood that Jesus saw that there was chaos in the earth, and that God created the heavens and the earth, and he took what was chaotic and he brought a rhyme and a reason to the chaos. He shaped the chaos. So in Genesis, if we see God bringing order out of chaos, here's what we find Jesus doing at this wedding. He is bringing order to what could be chaotic at a wedding. Have you ever been behind the scenes at a wedding? Everybody looks really nice if you're just a guest, but you see those who are behind the scenes. I mean, they're probably throwing shots in the back because they need to relax. They're freaking out, they're yelling at people, they're saying things they wouldn't normally say because there is potential chaos because everything has to be perfect at this wedding. But they're running out of wine at this wedding, and there is this moment where Mary, the mother of Jesus, began to use her voice because she anticipates something could go sideways here. Something could go wrong. I mean, have you ever been to a wedding where something went wrong? It's actually kind of fun to watch, unless it's your wedding. But I don't know about you, but sometimes it's fun to watch a video where the bride is walking and something happens and they trip and then they grab for the groom and they both fall in the pool together. They trip over and the wedding cake falls over and it looks kind of funny, but it's not really that funny if it's happening to you. But this is what Mary sees. She sees this faux pas, this thing that should not happen at a celebration, that we should not run out of wine. How are people going to view this family? How are people going to always remember the one wedding that was awful? And so she brings Jesus into the story because she believes Jesus and has faith that Jesus can actually do something about it. So let's dive into this real quick, starting in verse 1 and 2. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee, and Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. So let's stop right there and dive into some significant things that are happening here. As the more you learn scripture, the more you read the historical context, there are a few things that are happening behind the scenes here. So one of the questions you might have is, why a wedding? If Jesus is going to do his first sign, his first miracle in front of people, why is it at a wedding? And what is significant about the wedding? And that is, if we go back to the beginning like John does, that Jesus was in the beginning, the Word was with God, right? So you go back to Genesis chapter 1, it starts with this relationship that is forming. We call them Adam and Eve. In Hebrew, they're called Ish and Isha, meaning the same but different. They're human, they're the same, but they are different. And yet, Adam and Eve are forging this relationship that will really impact the rest of humanity. Genesis 2 says this about them: a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. It's stated again in the Gospel of Mark and a little bit more clear. Mark chapter 10, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. It's not lost on us that Jesus finds himself at a wedding when he was there in the very first relationship that ever existed. There's something beautiful about that, and there's some imagery that comes out of that. And what is the point, Carlos? I mean, we talking about weddings? I thought we were talking about signs, and yet there's context to what Jesus is doing. Jesus is super intentional. Jesus doesn't just do things by accident. I know some of us have certain personalities where we like just kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and then we find ourselves in situations we would never find ourselves in, and Jesus is not that person. Jesus is very mindful of his words and his action and the context in which he's doing something. So here he is at this wedding. He accepted an invitation. He is giving a blessing to what's happening. Otherwise, he wouldn't be there. There's something about union that is really important, and we're going to get to that here in a second. The second thing that is out of these first two verses, it says, and the third day. The third day is when Jesus shows up for this wedding. And there's something significant about third day. So in the Old Testament, which Jesus and Paul and other New Testament writers quote quite a bit, the third day is when a miracle or a sign took place on the third day. It's like when we say the weekend. When we say the weekend, it has a whole different context than when we say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. When we say the weekend, it may be something completely different for you. So that phrase third day means something is about to occur. And the third day is also significant because it's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. The day that he said it, he called his shot. He knew what was about to happen. And he said on the third day, he would be raised again. And if you go to John chapter 2, which you're reading right now, you even go to verse 19 and says this, Jesus answered them, the religious leaders, destroy this temple, being him. And they thought it was a physical temple. And I will raise it again in 3 days. There's a third day that happens. There's a third day where God intervenes. There's a third day where we see things the way we're supposed to see them. Many of you came to know Jesus. Many of you have experienced miracles. That is a third day experience. So we're at a wedding. There's this third day happening. And here's another thing that stands out is the imagery, and we've kind of alluded to this, of Jesus as the bridegroom and the church of God being the bride. And so we're at a wedding in the context of a bride and a groom on a third day where something is anticipating to happen as we look through history on third day type of experiences. And we see that Jesus is beginning to foreshadow the reason he came to the earth. There's this foreshadowing. If you know what foreshadowing is in reading, it's when you read something, you've been reading a book or watching a movie and that just seems weird. Well, the director of the movie or the writer of the book is foreshadowing. You need to know this because it's going to make sense 30 minutes from now. It's going to make sense 6 chapters from now. It's a foreshadowing of what's to come. And Jesus is in this moment of foreshadowing what is about to come. This new family that's going to be forged. That he brings us in as the bride of Christ, and he is the groom, and there's this family that's forged, and we are adopted as sons and daughters. It's picture that's starting to come into focus. John chapter 3 says this, the bride belongs to the bridegroom, and the friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. And that joy is mine, and it is now complete. And these disciples that were with Jesus brought his disciples to the wedding. I don't know if they had invites themselves, but he brought them as a +1 or a +12, right? You ever had a party and stuff? Can I bring somebody? And they bring out a whole family with them. Like, okay, you smile really big, you're hospitable, maybe you grew up in the South, and it's like, it's fine. And underneath, you're like, we're gonna run out of food, and I can't believe it. But Jesus brought 12 men with him to a party. Can you imagine just 12 men showing up? Like in my house, my 23-year-old said, can I still stay at home? I'm like, why? I wanna save money. I wanna show me you're saving money. But every once in a while, we have a meal, and I'm like, what happened to all the food? And I forget there's another man living in the house. Can you imagine 12 of them showing up? But they did because they were followers of him, and yet this is saying the friends bear witness. John 15 says this, you are my friends if you do what I command. So you now start seeing this foreshadowing of Jesus, these men who started following him, and he's speaking life into them that you are now my friends. If you do what I say, we're gonna forge this relationship together. My question for you today is, are you growing to become a friend of Jesus? There was a song, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, I am a friend of God. And I hated that song. Because I was a new follower of Jesus, and I was like, I'm not Jesus' friend. Like, I'm not worthy to be Jesus' friend. Like, I am just happy that he came and he died for my sins, and I have a new life, and I was breaking the patterns of addiction in my life. I'm not trying to be the friend of Jesus, and yet in the progression of our relationship, we go from just following Jesus and exploring Jesus to being friends with Jesus. There's this dynamic that begins to be forged. So there's some interesting things taking place here that give us context, and then we get to verse 3. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. So again, you have Mary stepping in, the mother of Jesus, understanding that this party is not like your party, right? This is like, I know the average person throws a birthday party for their kid and they're like, it's gonna start at 4:00 and please pick up your children at 6. We prefer you stay, please. But pick them up by 6 and we're gonna clean up and we're gonna have a great 2-hour birthday party. That's not how they did things. They did things like the birthday party I took my son to yesterday. I took my son to a birthday party at 4. I said, what time is the party over? She goes, we'll be here all night. I'm like, they're 9. Yeah, well, we might even be here till tomorrow. And you know what? She looked at me, she goes, we're Mexican. This is how we do things. I was like, I'm Mexican too, but I want to get to bed. So you can keep my son till tomorrow. I think I'm okay with that. And literally, it was just like free for, I showed up and they were like on their 3rd meal last night. I was like, Max, did you eat? He goes, nah, I ate the first meal. What meal is this? I don't know. And I think the food was actually for the adults because the little kids weren't even eating anything. See, it was that kind of party that was culturally relevant to the day. It wasn't, it starts at 4, it ends at 6. It starts today at 4, and it ends 5 days from now at 6. And here you are already on the 3rd day running out of wine. A faux pas. This cannot happen. This will be cultural embarrassment. They have no more wine. And I know during COVID, a lot of you said that. I have no more wine. How do I know? Because the stats show it. And yet here you have this relationship with Jesus and he's saying, woman, why do you involve me? What he's saying is, this is none of my business. This is not my party. You ever showed up to something and there's a party not going well and you're like, can I go to the store for you? Can I help you? And Jesus is like, I'm just chilling. I don't want to do anything. I just brought 12 of my friends and we're just here to eat and have a good time and bless the happy couple. And now you want me to create wine? And sometimes when we read this, we can insert, because of the way it is in English, when he says, woman, why do you involve me, as though he's speaking down to his mother. But you have to understand that Mary is not just any other woman. And sometimes in the church, we will downplay the role of Mary. And I think it's really sad to see, because there's this Greek word for Mary, and it's Theotokos. She is the God-bearer. She is the one who was chosen because of her life. The Holy Spirit united with her to bring in the Savior of the world. So he wasn't speaking down to her. There was a place of honor for Mary when it comes to Jesus. And we gotta know that. And there's a lot we can dive into here. It's really important. The Theotokos, the God-bearer, Mary, her relationship with Jesus. It's so important. I'm gonna tease you for a little bit for a couple of months. We're actually gonna have a whole Sunday in a couple of months. We're gonna talk about the relationship between Mary and Jesus. That's the entire Sunday morning. So we're not gonna dive into that today, but I do want you to know how important it is, the relationship between Mary and Jesus and the honor. But I do wanna kind of close that loop for us today before we move on. It's Jesus at the cross, and he uses the same phrase, woman. And I want to show you how it's not degrading to her, but it's actually very tender. He's at the cross and he's seen Mary. It's John chapter 19. He says, and when Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. It was this tenderness. So he's not saying woman. I know some of us are like, don't call me a woman. Say, ma'am. That's actually what he's saying. He said, yes, ma'am. However, this has nothing to do with us. How many of you grew up with parents that wanted you to perform on spot for their friends? Johnny, show everybody that you just learned the Star Spangled Banner. Okay. Jose, can you see? And you got stage fright? You know what I'm talking about? My dad did this to me all the time. My dad was a traveling evangelist. We'd go to a church and there was nobody singing a special. You know what a special is? It's when somebody gets up who thinks they know how to sing and they sing a special song. It's a solo for the entire church. And we showed up to a church that did not have a special, and guess who was on? Little 10-year-old Carlos. Son, you're gonna sing today. Oh my gosh, I hate this church. I would say that, literally. And you know what he'd make me sing? In the 80s, there was this dumb character named Salty the Singing Songbook. And I had to sing songs by Salty the Singing Songbook, a man in blue tights with a book hanging out of his back. And I was supposed to entertain the crowd. And my dad would get on him, he's like, you don't look like you have joy in your life. I don't right now. You don't even think, like, it doesn't look like you believe in Jesus. I don't believe in Jesus. So I kind of understand what Jesus is going through. His mom's like, hey, there's this thing happening. And Jesus is like, but yes, ma'am, I understand. Yet it doesn't have anything to do with us. It's respectful, it's tender. And we'll, again, dive into that relationship. But we're gonna go to verse 4 for now. And he says, and my hour has not yet come. And there's two types of time in the Bible. There's chronos, which is like the root word for chronological, so it's actual time. And then there's kairos, which is an opportune time. So, we can interchange those sometimes when you look at somebody and say, hey, it's time to go. Well, you're not telling them, hey, it's 6:53, it's time to go. You're saying, in general, it's time to go. We're trying to get to our movie. We're trying to get to the game. We're trying to make it to school on time. There's chronos, and then there's kairos. And Jesus is not saying, hey, it's not the right time of day to do this miracle. It's not the right opportune time for me to do this miracle. Again, Jesus is super intentional. He's very careful about what he's doing. Jesus is very aware of everything that he's about to do, because he came to do something that was going to change the world. He came to do something that we would have the benefits of 2,000 years later. He's having this conversation, and yet Mary's faith in him was so strong that before he said yes, she said yes for him. Almost leading her son into the miracle. Not that Jesus didn't know he could do it, but he was thinking of time differently than his mother was thinking about it, and yet he stepped into that, which is another way to show a sign of respect towards his mother. John 2:5, she says, do whatever he tells you. Mary didn't know how Jesus was going to do it. She didn't say, okay, son, here's what I need you to do. This, plus this, plus this, plus this, and then ta-da, we're gonna have wine for everybody. She said, hey, Jesus, I'm gonna leave it to you to do it however you see fit, but you know what? Get ready, servants, because he's gonna ask you to do something. There was a faith she had in Jesus, a confidence in his goodness. So what do we learn from all this? What do we learn from the context we're setting? What do we learn about Jesus? And it says Jesus brings quality to our life. Jesus brings us out of death into life and then raises the quality of that life as we progress and grow in him. Verse 6 through 11, nearby stood 6 stone jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So he gives them the command, like Mary said. So they filled them to the brim. And then he said, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. And then again, the servants did it. The master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first. He didn't go to Jesus because he didn't know. He gave credit to the bridegroom. And then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best until now. And there's some significant things that really stand out to us that we need to understand. There's significance. There's significance of the stone water jars. The jars were used for ceremonial cleaning. How many of you would admit, if you're watching online or in a room, you're a little bit of a germaphobe? Raise your hand. Come on, a little bit of a germaphobe. So let me give you some imagery that's gonna ruin this story for you. He used jars where people wash their hands and feet. Some of y'all are like, well, why didn't Jesus just spray it first? Right? But he used it, and what it shows us is that they filled it to the brim because what he was going to bring made it clean. So when he turned the water to wine, it's symbolic of what he does with us. That we are jars of clay. That we are broken. We have a brokenness about us. There's a dirtiness about us. There's a ruggedness about us. There's sin patterns. There are things that we tend to do in our lives, and yet Jesus still looks at you and says, yeah, but when I fill you up, you are clean and ready to go. But I don't just fill you up with water. I fill you up with who I am, the wine, the new wine that comes from knowing Jesus. So he doesn't go and say, now take these jars and go clean them, let them sit out for a couple days, and once they're all clean, well, no. He says, take the thing that nobody would ever drink out of. Some of you are people that nobody would ever give a second chance to. Take the thing that seems dirty and broken to the rest of the world, and watch what I do with it. They fill it with water. He turns it to wine, and then there is the quantity of wine. Guys, 20 to 30 gallons per stone. That's like having 12 kegs of wine. 12 kegs of wine. Like, some of you are like, wow, what a wedding. Yeah. He didn't just say, all right, I'll give you enough to kind of last you. When Jesus does something, he does it in an extravagant way. He does it in a way that you and I could never do it. Don't you ever just want to live extravagantly? I did something last week that I've always wanted to do. It's ridiculous, I know. But I remember in college, I went to go visit a friend of mine, and his mom had an extra refrigerator because she had 5 boys. And the refrigerator was filled with like Gatorade and sodas and waters. And it was every time I went over there, it was always filled. And they were always just so generous. Sometimes I would just drive by there and get a Coke and leave. That's all I was there for. And they didn't care. They wanted us to be there. And so last week we were having some people over and we're watching some football. And I went to go buy some water. And you guys been around. No, I'm a cheapskate. Are you gonna finish? I like go to people. Are you gonna finish that bottle of water? I bought that. You took that out of my refrigerator. I need you to finish that. My wife's like, chill out, honey. They're a guest. So I went overboard. Why? Because they had a coupon. I got a coupon. I want to be generous today. And I bought several packets of water and several canisters of drinks and several. And I was so proud of myself. I was like, look, honey, I did it. She was like, I'm so proud of you. Can you do it next week? And I was like, yes, the coupon doesn't expire for 2 more weeks. And yet Jesus doesn't need a coupon to be generous. It is who he is, that he would give extravagantly. And the third thing that is really important for us is there's this relationship. If we look back at the relationship, what God begins to do and how he's using Jesus in this story, and again, foreshadowing what's to come. But if we look back to the Old Testament, we see this parallel with Moses, Patriarch Moses, and what he does with the people of Israel, because Moses is at a river and at the Nile, and he has his staff, and as one of the miracles that God uses him to do, he puts the staff in the water, and this river that is used for ceremonial cleaning turns to blood. He's trying to get the attention of Pharaoh to release his people. And so here's what we have in this. We're going to put it on the screen. Some of the parallels that we find between Moses and Jesus through this story. So the first one is this. The type of water that we see here is Moses is using the water from a river, all right? And then we see that Jesus is using water from jars. So again, they're not the same, but there's a parallelism. And then they're seeing the context of the sign. Moses is with the people of Israel who are under oppression, who are slaves. He's trying to bring them into freedom, to take them to the promised land. And Jesus, his context of the sign is celebration. It's a wedding. They're gonna celebrate. In Moses, the object is turned into a river of blood. The water in the river is turned to a river of blood. And for Jesus, the object is turned into wine. For Moses, to what end? To bring external freedom. These people who are oppressed are trying to find external freedom. It's physical freedom from being slaves. And for Jesus, to what end? There's an internal freedom. There's a freedom that Jesus came to bring to our hearts and to our souls. And then this last thing is how the people were led. If for Moses, because there was external freedom, they were transported. They left Egypt to go into the desert to make their way to the promised land. But in Jesus, how are people led? They are transformed. So there's parallelism happening between Moses and Jesus from the Old Testament to the New, and it all comes down to this. What does belief have to do with it? Well, what is it that we believe? So verse 11, John chapter 2, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of signs through which he revealed his glories, and his disciples believed in him. They had already decided to follow him. They already decided to come to church on a Sunday morning. They already decided to join a group. They already decided to come for prayer at the end of each service. They already decided to check their kids in. They already decided to have their kids go to students. They already decided to follow Jesus. But this first sign made them believe in him. We can be around the things of God, but does our heart believe in him? That there is power in who Jesus says he is. There's a progression. We go from exploring, or maybe not even caring who God is, to exploring who God is, to saying yes to Jesus, to understanding how that works in our lives, to help and disciple other people, and then raising future generations. There's a progression in our lives, and we see this progression in these people who follow Jesus and now believe in Jesus. This progression from small things to larger things. This progression from our head to our heart. This progression from wonder to beloved. The progression from believing he can do it for others to desiring that he does it in us. The progression from Jesus as miracle worker to Jesus as a sign to follow. This progression from belief in Jesus to a love for Jesus. And this progression from hearing his words to truly being his friend and obeying his words. What does belief have to do with it? Belief is where it begins. Belief is not where it ends. Belief is where you begin to start to understand who Jesus is. And for some of us, we're on one side, not sure if we believe quite yet. And others of us believe, but are we progressing just like the disciples of Jesus progressed and grew? How are you being transformed? Because the power of Jesus transforms from water to wine, from dirty and unusable to being the best there ever was, from being broken and marginalized to being set free. God using you to be his light in the world. Belief matters. I'm gonna ask you to close your eyes and bow your heads. Again, this is nothing super religious, just more for introspection. As we begin the next few minutes of just listening, we're gonna sing a song together. But I did want to ask the question, how many of you would say today, Carl says, this is where I'm at. I want to acknowledge today that I need to believe. I want to believe. That this is the Jesus who transformed. I'm ready for my life to be transformed. I've been listening, I've been exploring, but today's the day I want to say, I'm ready to progress in my walk with Jesus, and I want to acknowledge my need of him today. If that's you, just raise your hand. Just raise your hand. Then nobody else is looking. Yeah, 3 or 4. Yeah, there you go. More people just raise that. That's awesome. And how many of you would say, Carlos, I believe, but I haven't been progressing. I need to continue to grow my relationship with God. Raise your hand. Come on, just honest, I need to progress. I'm not seeing this traction. I need to get back. Yeah, awesome. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to open your eyes and look at me really quick. Can we just give it up for everybody who said today for the first time, I want to follow Jesus? Yeah, I see you. See you. And there's gonna be some opportunities for you to go. We wanna come alongside you. But as we sing this song, will we think about this? We call it reflection so that you can think through. I just said yes to Jesus. I just said I need to grow in Jesus. Why? Because the wine he performed there is in you. Can we let it come out of us today? Let's listen to this.